Great. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Yvonne Garcia, and I'm the chair of the Chamber's Women's Network Advisory Board. I'm also the chief of staff to the chairman and CEO of State Street and global head of communications. I'd like to take a moment to welcome anyone who's joining for the first time. I encourage you to join in today's discussion on social media using hashtag BossBizWomen and the @Boston Chamber. We really enjoy sharing stories and lessons that we learn from our speakers and are quite active on social media. So welcome if this is your first time joining us, and hopefully you will participate in the discussion. Also, unlike many times that we've met before in person, which seems like a foreign concept these days, we are leveraging the chat feature on at the bottom of your screens if you have any questions for our guest speakers today. This program's being recorded, and it'll also be posted on our YouTube page afterwards if you'd like to share it with all of your friends. Or if you'd like to hear the lessons that we're going to learn over again, please know that it will be recorded. So at the Women's Network, it's our mission to connect, advance, and celebrate professionals who identify as women. And having allies has been the key for many years to the advancement of women in the workplace, which is why we have this forum each year. Our partners at Diversity at Workplace define an ally as a person who is not a member of a particular marginalized group, but actively seeks to help the oppression of those in the marginalized group. And as part of Influence Her Week, a week that empowers women to achieve their definition of success, it feels incredibly fitting to have a conversation about inclusivity, leadership, and diverse representation, as it pertains to the experiences of women of color in the workplace. So when you think about the topic, I can't think of two better leaders and I would say in our community and beyond, right, to have this discussion. We're really blessed today to have our guest speaker, Minda Harts. She's the CEO of the Memo. And many of you may know Minda. She participated at the Women's Forum last December here in Massachusetts. And I was blessed to be on stage with her, and it was just an incredible discussion. So I know you're truly going to enjoy her. And then a more familiar face to us here in Boston, who will be moderating the discussion, is Sheena Collier. She's the founder and CEO of the Collier Connection. You may also recognize her because she was recently featured in the BBJ, where she's starting in about a week, which will launch Boston Wild Black with 100 other founding members. So we thank Sheena for her leadership in these very important topics that we're going to discuss today. So I'd like to also give a big thank you for our Women's Network sponsor, Morgan Lewis. We certainly appreciate their support and partnership of being able to bring this content and platform to all of you. And with that, I'd like to welcome Lisa Barton. She's the managing partner of Morgan Lewis Boston office, to introduce today's phenomenal speakers. So Lisa, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yvonne. It's a pleasure to be here. On behalf of Morgan Lewis, it's my honor to introduce today's guest speakers, Minda Harts and Sheena Collier. As Yvonne said, Minda Harts is the CEO of the Memo LLC and best-selling author of the Memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure a Seat at the Table. As an assistant professor at NYU's Wagner Graduate School of Public Service and host of the weekly podcast, Secure the Seat, Minda is sharing her wealth of knowledge, research, and experience with us, ensuring that we all get the memo when it comes to the experiences of women of color in the workplace. Minda has been featured in Time Magazine, The Guardian, Fast Company, and MSNBC's Morning Joe, and is a frequent featured speaker on leadership, managing diverse teams, and self-advocacy at companies such as Microsoft, Google, Nike, and Levi. Moderating today's discussion is super connector, facilitator, and strategist, Sheena Collier. Sheena is the founder and CEO of the Collier Connection, where she is creating an ecosystem that disrupts the way that Black professionals seek information, access, and belonging in cities. She also specializes in helping companies to engage new audiences through strategic events and inclusive business practices. Sheena is the curator of the Chamber's Fierce Urgency Now Millennials of Color Festival, which is scheduled to take place this September. She is the recipient of numerous awards and accolades, most recently being named as one of Harvard Club's Boston most influential women and receiving YW Boston's Academy of Women Achievers Sylvia Farrell Jones Award. We thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning.
Thank
Good
you,
morning,
Lisa.
Minda. Good to see you.
Good morning, Gina.
Excited for this conversation, so I'll jump right in with our first question. Obviously, we're here to talk about you and specifically the memo and just this incredible impact that your voice has had over the last couple of years around this topic on women of color in the workplace. So to start off, you know, in the memo, you talk about growing up in a low-income family. You have 2 younger brothers. Your advisor in high school encouraged students of color to attend community college or go the military route while advocating for white students to go to a 4-year college or university. So as a first-generation college student who was told by many that you weren't ready, you learned early in life that you would be your best advocate and that you had endless options. How has that lesson carried you throughout your career personally? How has it helped you as you help others?
Yeah, you're trying to get me crying already this morning, thinking about the journey. Sheena, really honored to be here in conversation with you. Thank you for your leadership in Boston and beyond. And again, thank you to the Chamber and all involved. And thank you to you, for all of you. You could be anywhere right now and you're here with us. You know, self-advocacy is one of those tools in my toolkit that I didn't realize that it's a muscle I'd always have to flex. If somebody tells you that you'll never have to try to advocate for yourself or stand up for yourself, that's just something that I think as women, especially women of color, that we have to lean into our courage on, because it's not always easy to do so. And one of the things I realized is growing up, I heard a lot of no's, or you can't do that because you're insert whatever that is. And I realized that I'm not going to let anyone write my own narrative for me, right? You know, self-advocacy is part of the equation that I can control. It's the self part of the equation, right? I can't dictate what other people do, but I can dictate how I respond and how I advocate for myself. And I realized that right now I'm working on writing 2 books at the same time, and I'm writing a version of the memo for young girls of color. And I'm writing a whole chapter on self-advocacy, because courage requires us to step up to the mic. And that's, again, one thing that I've realized: when people said no, I get to determine my yes. And it may not be those people that help me get to my destination, right? But there is somebody, there is one person. And so one of the things I realized, even as I wrote the memo, there were 4 out of 5 major publishers who said this book would never do well, that nobody wants to read the experiences of women of color, that racism isn't happening in the workplace. And lo and behold, right, here we are, here in this time period in our life. But it was because of self-advocacy. I know as a Black woman what it's like to be in the workplace. And so just always saying, you know what, okay, we're going to keep doing this, right? We're going to keep pushing, and our voices are needed, not just for us, but for the next generation to come. And so once I realized that it's not just about my self-advocacy, but my self-advocacy unlocks the potential for others to advocate for themselves as well.
Thank you, and thank goodness that you kept pushing. I think that is a lesson that many of us learn young, to listen to our own voice. You know, even when those that are in trusted positions are maybe telling us that we're not able to do what we set out to do. You just mentioned, you know, how many publishers turned down the memo. There are thousands of books and guides out there that discuss the experience of women in the workplace. What makes the memo different?
Yeah, so yes, there's so many career books, business books, we've all read them, right? But the one factor is most of these books are written by white men and women. And so there's a certain perspective that they're telling the story from. And oftentimes they're not talking about race, they're not talking about microaggressions or bias, they're talking about one size fitting all. And we know with the statistics that the workplace, not everybody experiences the workplace the same, and especially women of color. I mean, even from the leadership gap to the pay gap to board seats, we don't experience it the same way. And so for me, I really leaned into the late, great Toni Morrison. She said, write the book you want to read. And that's exactly what I did. I said, you know what's missing from the conversation? Intersectionality. So many more stories need to be told about career development, and what does career development look like for Black and brown women? We're not talking about that. And so for me, it was like, okay, well, I need to write this book. And I really was inspired by Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In, because when I was in corporate America, my manager and the leadership, who were all white men and women, said, this is the book for all women. This is the Women Manifesto. And when I read it, I'm like, wait a second, this is not my experience, right? And it had some very good information, but it's not the Women's Manifesto. And I think when we say women in the workplace, oftentimes we're talking about white women first. And then we're all addendums after that. And in order to make equity possible, we have to humanize the workplace for all women, or those who identify as women. And so I think for me, in 2015, it was a necessity for me to lean into my courage and talk about us, because who's going to advocate on our behalf when everybody's advocating on everybody else's? And so once we bring these issues to light, just like in your work, then our allies can step up because they can learn more and educate themselves as well.
That really just took me aback when you just said 2015, because I'm like, wow, this is 2020, and I feel like your book just came out. Just the level of how relevant it is, for one, and just how much I'm sure it is being elevated again, which we'll talk about in a second. I want to come back to what you said on the one-size-fits-all mentality, but wanted to hear a little from you, as you entered the workforce. What were the actual lessons and experiences that led you to write the memo? Like, where in that book, for all of us that have read it, are you showing up in there?
Yeah, Sheena, I have to be honest with you and everybody watching that when we talk about bring our authentic self to work, I brought my authentic self to work in the memo. I said, this is the opportunity that I get to write from my experience, no holds bars. I'm not going to censor myself, because what we've been conditioned as women of color, as Black women, is to silence ourselves at the expense of our own well-being. And how can we change the workplace if we don't talk about some of the ugly truths inside the workplace, right? That some have privilege that they're able to capitalize on, while others suffer in the workplace and don't have the opportunities to thrive, right? And that's not just feeling, those are facts. You know, there's studies that come out every year telling companies what's going on. And for me, I'm like, let me shine a light on this, but most importantly, let me write a book in which we get to see ourselves in the career narrative. And then our managers and our allies can understand what it's like to be the only one, to be othered, to work really hard and never have the opportunity as the person sitting next to you. And so for us, for Black women as women of color, many times we go to our career graves not even being able to tap into our full potential. And so writing the memo was a love letter saying, I see you, sis. The experiences, the racism, all of these things that you have dealt with to be able to put food on your table, I've been there too, right? You're not alone. And when you know that you're not alone and that you're not suffering in silence, that changes the entire game. And it was really important for me to address that, because so many of us are leaving corporate and nonprofit because we don't have the opportunities. And I'm saying, let's shift how the narrative is. I don't want you to leave because bad characters have pushed you out. Maybe there's another table for you. And I just felt like I needed to talk about those things, because, you know, I write about in the book one experience of a manager of mine looking at my nail color. It was burnt orange. And he said, you people really love your bright colors. And he went on to joke, mind you, I'm the only Black woman in the office in a professional role. And we're in the car with another white colleague, and he joked for 15 minutes, Sheena, about how Black people like bright colors. And I'm supposed to continue on with my day, go to the meeting, right? While he's joking, all those sorts of things. And we deal with that day in and day out. And nobody says anything. My colleague in the car never said anything, right? How many of us just let those things happen? And so I said, you know what? Time's up. We have to address these issues, because in order to solve problems, we have to identify the problems, and others have to allow us to be able to speak our truths.
That's powerful. So I read it when it came out. I've read it a couple of different times. I've led a book club discussion on it at a company in Boston. And, you know, something that you just said, in all that you just said, one of the key things I think really is at the core of many of the books and articles that are being written, many of the even kind of protesting that people are doing in different ways is just wanting to be seen and wanting to be acknowledged. And I think that wanting our experiences to be validated, wanting people to understand that this is actually different for me, and this is the ways that it's different. These are the ways, intentionally or not, that you are actually causing me harm in this space, and just being with us in that moment. And I know that there's so many more things other than that, legislation and policies and et cetera, but a lot of it is about being seen and being acknowledged.
I just want to touch on that. I'm thankful that you said that, because at the end of the day, don't we all want to be seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't we all want to be humanized in the experience? And one of the things, when my agent went to shop the memo around, thank God Seal Press has Shep Book Group, they said yes, but many of the people around the table had not experienced these situations, so they were able to dictate what books get put on the shelf. That nobody wants to read about racism in the workplace. These are isolated situations. And now look at the backdrop that we're in. Before, so many years, we've been, don't play the race card, don't talk about race, silence yourselves, oh, that's just Bob being Bob, all those different things that are said to us, diminishing our experiences. And now all of a sudden, this weird juxtaposition where people are like, talk about race, tell us about race. We're exhausted, okay? And I think that's part of the empathy gap, not understanding that for so long the system has said, we don't see you, your voices, your experiences don't matter. And now all of a sudden, we're supposed to be ready and do a dance and tell you all about the things. And I think that it takes time to get there, and it takes relationship building, but I'm so glad we're having these conversations to elevate and amplify the voices who have been silenced for centuries.
Yeah. So I mentioned, that there are thousands of these books and guides that talk about women in the workplace. You mentioned Lean In. And in the book, you talk about this one-size-fits-all mentality when it comes to discussing experiences of women. So one of the things that I appreciated, and, I think that made the memo really relate to me and other women that I've discussed it with, is you were very clear, probably literally from the first page, of who you were talking about and why. And, you're talking to everyone, because you mentioned even in your intro that you want managers to read it and allies to read it and others to understand, but you called it a love letter to women of color. And so what are the flaws with this one size fits all mentality that we have about discussing women in the workplace? And what do you think we as a society are failing to realize when we do that?
Yeah, great question. I think it's, again, seeing ourselves in other people, right? So for so many years, we walk into the proverbial workplace or the Zoom room, and we think that just because we all work at said company, we must experience this company the same, but realizing that everyone's experience is not the same. And then we have to allow space to be able to see the nuances and see recognize our biases. And I think when we say, again, when we make broad strokes of women in the workplace, or when we have gender initiatives within companies, those are great and they're needed. But again, even in those systems and those initiatives, we're not focusing on all women. Statistics show that white women benefit from gender initiatives, whereas women of color and Black women don't. And so again, we have to realize that we have to break this system. It's a system of privilege that eliminates those who haven't been at the table historically. And so when we put these one size fits all solutions together, or we have only a certain group of people making decisions for other people, then you miss out on diversity of thought, diversity of gender, diversity of age, LGBTQ, veterans, mothers. It's really important that we understand the experiences of everyone. I teach a class at NYU, and I always ask my students, how much of the workforce do you want to use? Because if we're only picking and choosing who we want to use, then there's this whole other group of people that never get an opportunity to show what they got, right? Show us what they're working with. And again, that takes intentionality. Even right now, many companies are making commitments to Black employees. But again, we're making broad strokes. Have you had conversations with your Black employees to ask them, what does success look like? What does good look like to us? Again, we can't create narratives for people if we're not having these hard conversations. And it's really going to take some critical self-evaluation of self for those who are the majority to say, yes, I might be a good person, but how have I perpetuated racism in the workplace, right? Doesn't mean I'm necessarily racist, but have I been contributing to behaviors that don't help everybody, right? So again, when we do these broad strokes of things, even with women of color, when we say women of color, every woman of color doesn't even experience the workplace the same, right? So we really have to understand and know our history to really get down to how do we dismantle systemic oppression in the workplace and beyond.
Yeah, you know, I saw a quote, and I hesitate to bring up quotes because I can never remember them exactly, and I never remember who said them. But the gist of it was that it was talking about cities, but I think the same thing applies to companies, that no city can realize its full potential unless it's really activating all of the people in that city and really giving everyone the opportunity to contribute in a particular way. And I think that, you know, that's some of what you're saying we miss as a society when we try to kind of lump everyone together. We're not really maximizing everyone's potential to be able to contribute to us having better cities, better companies, et cetera. So I appreciate that. You know, you did do a have to balance while you were writing this book as far as, you know, this very specific message to women of color, particularly Black women, saying, I see you, and also to others to say, hey, this is the experience, this is how you can play a role in changing this. How did you balance those different perspectives and also pushing success partners, which we'll talk about in a second, to unlearn what's been comfortable?
Yeah, it was hard, definitely, because and writing the memo was very therapeutic for me, because spending 15 years in a traditional work setting, there was a lot of suppression that I did of things, right? I started to settle into the microaggressions. I started to settle into the bias. And so what I realized was, if I was settling into this stuff and just, you know, saying, oh, well, this is just how it's going to be for me, how I'm A, doing myself a disservice, but B, I'm doing the next generation of women of color and Black women and women, period, that come behind me. Because if I'm not doing the things I need to do to make the workplace better than I found it, then what in the world am I doing, right? And so we have to decide on what we want to do. And at the core of who I am, I'm an optimist. And so I had to address the issues, the systems that have held many of us back, not because we're not educated enough, not because we haven't put in the work, just because that's the way the system was built. The system was created without us at the table, right? It was created with us in mind that we would not be a part of it, right? And that's where we are right now. So when people don't understand what's going on, it's the system. This is a system that we have to dismantle. And what I realize is, once we understand the system, we can create solutions. And I then take you on a journey in the book to say, this is real, this is our experiences, but this is how we overcome, right? Because I think at the end of the day, all of us want to make the workplace better than we found it, but we just may not have the tools to do it. And so once you provide the tools, you provide a new frame of mind, right? This enemy state of mind to an empire state of mind. We can do it. We can do it together. Success is not a solo sport. In order for me to have my seat, I'm going to need some people to activate their privilege to help me get there, right? And so, and then what's within ourselves that we could do to make sure that we're prepared when that seat does open up, right? And the seat can be but the seat, Sheena, has to be first in our mind. We have to know that we belong. Mm-hmm. Audre Lorde says, beware of feeling like you're not good enough to deserve it. We deserve it. We deserve every room we walk into, we belong, but not every room deserves us in it. And so once we understand that, then we can work together to dismantle these systems. And we got to share the secret sauce. So many people get to where they are and they don't share that sauce. They don't share that privilege. And so for me, I did have a seat at the table eventually. And I wanted to be able to use my level of influence to help change the trajectory of the next generation and current generations.
Not every room deserves us in it. Wow. Yeah, I think that Minda, you just keep dropping so many gems. You're like throwing me off. There's so many things I want to comment on. So I think, you know, and starting to think about, or just shifting to thinking about being in those rooms and just making sure that there is not just diversity, but inclusion of our voices. You know, you mentioned us having a seat at the table, bringing our own tables, building our own tables. A lot of workplace conversation is becoming about this kind of diverse representation in the workplace, the lack of inclusivity, you know, bias, unconscious bias. What are, you've touched on some of this, so I'm gonna kind of put together a couple of questions, but what are the ways that those biases keep appearing in the workplace to keep us kind of out of those rooms? And what would you say, you know, I think that there's kind of general agreement at this point that diversity in hiring is important. You know, regardless of the level of how deeply someone understands it, I think there's a general consensus like, okay, that makes sense. But we still seem to be struggling with it. So, you know, how are these biases showing up in our workplace? And what would you say to businesses about, you know, this is really the benefits of having Black women and women of color at your table?
Yeah. You know, the benefit is being able to retain and advance folks, right? You know, oftentimes I work with a lot of companies and I'll hear, well, we can't find anybody. You know, well, where are you looking? You know, are you investing? In order to scale diversity, it requires an investment, just like any other part of your business. You wouldn't ask, if the marketing department asked you for a marketing budget, you wouldn't think that is absurd. But when the ERG asks you for a budget, we don't have it. You can't scale diversity without an investment in it. And I think once we shift that mindset to understand that there should be a budget for diversity, that means the sourcing tools we use, the headhunters we use, you can't go back to the same pool and expect a different wave, okay? It's just not gonna happen. And so you have to be intentional about it. So the next opportunity, let's say, for example, you have an open position right now. You decide, intentionality, you would decide, I'm not going to fill that position until we have interviewed a diverse slate of candidates, right? This is an opportunity to be intentional. But going to the same pools, again, expecting a different result, we're never going to get there. And then also, too, think about parity. We talk about, oh, equal pay for equal work. Well, let's do the work. Let's see the pay transparency. If you want to be able to make sure that your Black and brown talent stay, make sure everybody is getting paid what they deserve and their worth. Like, these are the things that we can do, because another statistic out there is that women of color are leaving corporate America in a mass exodus, not because we want to start our own businesses necessarily, but because we can't thrive in an environment where we keep bumping our head on a middle ladder, right? We want to be able to be in that C-suite. We want to be in management roles, because oftentimes we're always the go-to person anyway, but we don't have the title. And so I think it's really important that we are intentional. And for those who are not people of color, who consider themselves allies or good managers, whatever have you, this is your opportunity to decide, how am I going to use my privilege? It's not saying we don't want you at the table as well, but how can I activate my privilege to help someone else who deserves it, right? This is not charity, but this is allowing other voices, because if we decide that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is very important in this next industrial revolution of work, then it's going to require new voices at the table to provide new solutions. And so I think it's okay to admit that, right? But we don't have to operate in this scarcity mindset that if we promote a Black woman or a Black man or a Latinx woman or a transgender woman, that means that I'm not going to get my check, right? That means there's still room for everybody. But in order, and we've already talked about in many of the articles that it's good for business, right? And so I think the businesses that are going to thrive, Sheena, are the ones that have some intentionality and understand it's going to require an investment to scale.
Let's talk about the term ally, because I thought it was interesting that you pulled this out in the book. So a term that had become very popular, you know, some would consider it overused. I very rarely use it personally, because what I started to see is people are deeming themselves an ally. I think that if you're an ally, someone else will tell you that you're an ally. I don't think it's necessarily for you to say that. You talk about the phrase success partner, and tell us why and how does a success partner different from an ally?
Yeah, well, you hit it on the head, Sheena. Allyship, I have found that people love to call themselves allies without doing any work. If you were ever maybe a Girl Scout or a brownie or something, you know that in order to get a badge, you had to put in some work, right? It required some service. And allyship takes courage, right? Allyship requires something from you, right? Allyship should at some point make you say, oh, am I really ready to do that? Right. And I think some people need to sit with themselves and ask themselves, do I really want to be an ally? Because being an ally requires something of me. And it's not just calling myself that. It requires shifting the word into action, making it a verb. And so because fundamentally we all know and understand what an ally should look like or is, but I'm pushing that to the side and saying, what would it look if you partnered with us on the road to success? Right? Because I mentioned that success is not a solo sport, but we're going to need some of your privilege to activate in other areas so that we're partnering together on this road. And that requires some relationship building, right? In my experience in the Memo, I had many success partners or those who would consider themselves sponsors or allies that they were able to use their privilege to catapult my career by leaps and bounds, right? Because they saw that they could do that, and that required them speaking my name in certain rooms, giving me the opportunities that they knew I could shine, even when maybe others were questioning if I could do it because I hadn't had the opportunity to do it before. And they go to bat for you, they vouch for you, they invest in your company, rather it returns or not, but they're saying, I'm invested in your success, Sheena. I want Boston While Black to work. I'm invested. What can I do, right? Or when police brutality is going on, calling your local police department and saying, we're not going to stand for this type of treatment. No more chokeholds, right? Or whatever the case. Like allyship, success partnership requires something different of us. And I would really encourage our allies, our new success partners to think about what are they going to do to shift the action in their life, right? And you don't have to know a person of color or any other group, marginalized group, to be a success partner. I bet you could think about something right now in the next 30 days that you could leverage your network to help somebody else out, right? Because listen, at the end of the day, someone probably helped you to get where you are. But again, because of the system, we don't have all of the contacts and the network and the finances that other people might have. Just buying the Memo is an act of success partnership, because now you're understanding, how can I be a better manager? How can I be a better friend? How can I be a better colleague? Understanding that when my colleague walks into the office during a time like this, or virtual office, that this might be what they're experiencing right now. You know, and so I think it can look so many different ways, but I would really ask again for people to really think long and hard before they call themselves an ally. Are you ready to do the real work of what it takes to do that?
Yes, thank you. And, you know, speaking of, you know, this time that we're in and just how timely this conversation is. So we were actually originally supposed to have this conversation in April, and we weren't able to because of COVID. And I think that, you know, we're actually having it in a time where it's probably much more relevant. You know, you stated in the book that the current system is broken and it will take all hands on deck to reassemble a table that did not originally have a seat for us. You know, our country is experiencing a crisis related to the pervasive racism that is the foundation of our country, that's quickly become the largest movement for racial equity that we've seen in our lifetimes. What impact has this had on your business and your platform? You know, I mentioned to you when we talked the other day, like I'm sure, and I mentioned it today, this came out in 2015, but I'm sure for many people, this is like an introduction to you. So just what impact has the current climate had on the things that you've been already talking about?
Yeah, you know, so before the book came out last year, I started my company, The Memo, in 2015, and a lot of people did not want to talk about women of color in the workplace. I mean, I even had an investor say, we'll invest in you if you stop talking about Black women at work. And I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. So I guess I'll keep bootstrapping. You know, these are the things that I'm just really, it's like a bittersweet feeling, right? You know, because for so long, I've been talking about systemic racism as in the workplace, and how it has killed, racism doesn't just kill people, it kills careers too. And I wanted to be able to talk about that in a way, I don't want to use the word happy, but I'm like, finally is the feeling that I'm feeling, that companies are talking about this or allowing us to have these conversations, because they're long overdue. And what people don't often realize, yes, we can all walk into the same bathroom and drink from the same water fountain, but there's still systems of oppression in place in many spaces and many industries. And I know it's uncomfortable for many people to talk about race, but think about how uncomfortable it's been for us when you haven't wanted to talk about race. Because if you don't see me, then you don't see the struggle, you don't see the wins, you don't see the challenges. And to your point early on, being seen is dynamic, right? We all want to be seen. So when someone says, I don't see color, I want you to see me. I want you to see every piece of me, because once you see me, you humanize me. But when you don't see me, you don't humanize our experiences. And so, one thing that my mom always says, sometimes you just need people to hear you out. And I think this is the time where the majority needs to hear us out, because we have the solutions to this oppressive system that we've been operating in. But the good news is the decisions that we make today dictate the way the future of the workplace will look. And so I'm hopeful with all the success partners that will start to think about how we can change it for good, because I cried the same workplace tears my grandmother cried. I don't want my nieces and nephews to be crying the same tears that I've cried too.
Mm. As women of color, as Black women in particular, navigating this space, all the attention that's coming with it, the opportunities to learn and educate others. We also know it comes with a big toll, just like emotional toll. It is a lot to educate while you're also feeling your own feelings about what's going on. Having conversations with white colleagues about how they're experiencing what's happening while watching Black people be murdered it's a lot to balance. And I know one of the things that I've struggled with is I don't want to miss this moment. Like I want to actually just curl up in a ball and not talk to anyone. And I also know that my voice is very powerful and people look to me for leadership. And so I feel like I might miss the moment if I don't speak out. How are you coping with balancing both roles in addition to taking care of yourself and acknowledging your own personal feelings? And are you feeling any pressure around it?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Sheena, because it's tough. I have a lot of well-intentioned people say to me, oh, doesn't this feel different, Minda? And it's like, well, it feels different for you, but it's felt oppressive to us in many ways. And I think when we talk about working while Black or working while other, many people are requiring us to do our job, do it well, like don't stop working, don't stop doing that thing, and then give us all the answers, tell us all the things, and then come to the this and come to the that, and we never have time to grieve. We're grieving as a community, and we're grieving for other things, and I don't think our counterparts have understood what that is, or what that feels like, because they haven't had to grieve in the same ways that we have. And so doing this work, as you know, this racial justice work, it's a heavy lift all in and of itself, but to do it in COVID, to do it in quarantine, to do it under the racial tension of our country, it's tough. Last week I had this surgery and I had to take a couple of days off, and it was like, whew, I could almost like breathe for a second, because as you said, business is booming right now, right? Everybody wants to talk, everybody wants you to talk about it, and it's tough. But what I realize is this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? We can't solve 400 plus years of problems in a Zoom call, right? It's going to take chunks, and it's okay for people of color to say, I'm not able to talk about this right now, but here's some resources. And then our counterparts, our success partners, need to be empathetic to that and say, wow, yeah, I guess that is tough, right? To be in this space, and we don't have all the answers, right? And understanding, again, humanizing our experience. If you are a Black person and you're dealing with all of these things, then how would you feel right now? So when you text me, how am I feeling? You know how I'm feeling right now, but I need you to be a good success partner to help change these things so that I don't have to keep feeling this way. And so it's a tough time, but I think our employers, we have to understand and create space that not every Black woman is going to want to talk about this right now. And if she's not ready to talk about that, then we need to say, okay, because that's not part of your job description. But for those who want to, we'll bring in and we'll pay the people to come in and talk about these things, right? So I think, again, we need to humanize the experiences of every single person, because if you only have one Black woman on your team and everybody's going to her for everything, think about how draining that is. That's why diversity is so important. We're not just asking the one. I saw a tweet that said, everybody's one Black friend is really exhausted right now because everybody's going to them. And so think not just in the workplace, but in your own personal life, how you're perpetuating certain systems and how you can be more empathetic.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I definitely put my phone on mute for a couple of days because I do think, people, while well-intentioned, I think miss a lot of that. Both of us have built our businesses, and I think really our missions in life are to better the experiences for you of women of color in the workplace, for me, around the experiences of people of color, particularly Black people in the city of Boston. At the heart of both of those businesses is this desire to create the change that we want to see. And I would say, a tagline that I use in my business is create the city you want to live in. What piece of advice can you give other entrepreneurs who are looking to do the same? I think a lot of people have been ignited in this time. A lot of people are trying to figure out what they can do next. What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, don't stop. Like this is just beginning, right? Like I said, we can't solve it all in a Zoom call, in a couple Zoom calls. This is going to take intentionality. And I think we have to first deal with the ugly truths of our own workplaces, because if we say Black Lives Matter, they have to also matter for the people inside your company. They have to feel like they matter in the workplace and that their voices are heard. And so remind yourselves to start at home. And so start at home and figure out home being your workplace or your physical home, but what that looks like, and realize that it's going to take some time, right? But you also have to have those conversations. It's going to require courageous conversations, and it's going to require some courageous listening, because you might hear some things that are going to make you uncomfortable. Some things that you might not been aware of that you were doing or that the system is doing. And so take those 30, 60, 90-day chunks and figure out, what can you do now? What can you do this quarter? What can you do next quarter? By this time next year, how have we measured success, right? We can't just say we want to do better, but what does better look like? So I would push everyone to break them down in chunks, see what's going on, look at the retention numbers, look at the exit interviews. How can we do a better job? And then bring people together and talk about how we dig deeper into that, because the only way we're going to change this system is if we start to do the work. But again, it's not going to be solved right now. So it's going to require an investment of time, energy, and various voices.
Yeah. Just thinking about your vision for, where your hometown as well as this country and the world. Boston is somewhere, like many places in the country, that has this reputation of not being inclusive. And we continue to wear that reputation, and hopefully we'll continue to do the work to change that. How do you, through the work that you do, through the work that you see others doing, really change the face of a city like Boston, and ultimately this country and the world?
Yeah, well, I think for Boston is amplifying and supporting businesses like yours, Sheena, the people who are doing the work, others like Darla, DeGrace in Boston, find those people who are doing the work and partner, be a success partner with them. Like, what is it going to take? Invest in Black business, invest in women of color businesses. And so I think, again, we don't have to recreate the wheel. There are people who've been doing this work that you may not even know are doing it. So latch on to them, be a success partner. And so I'm a real big advocate of how can you solve problems locally, because that's where the real change occurs, in our neighborhoods, on our committees, on the school board. And so I hope more women of color and Black women and women in general will be a part and join in on those Zoom city council meetings and speak your truths, but find those people who are doing the work and support them, because success is not a solo sport. The way we change is if we amplify the voices of people who have been holding space for us all this time.
Just a two more questions for me, and then we have a couple from the audience. So, you know, this is being hosted by the Chamber. We got to talk about the business community's role in this. The Chamber is playing a role here in this region in convening and advocating for diverse and collaborative membership to drive Greater Boston success. What are some concrete next steps that businesses can take to build off of this current momentum of what's happening in the country and make sure that this time this is a movement and not just a moment in time?
Yeah, that's my biggest fear, right? Like when the next big thing comes, then we forget what we committed to. But it's going to require all of us to hold businesses accountable in our leadership. And so it can't be just me and Sheena trying to hold people together and accountable. It's got to be all of us, right? We have to commit today that we're going to hold folks accountable. And I think for businesses, again, diversifying your decision-making team. I mean, it really does start at the top. If the leaders at the top are saying this is important and you're having conversations with communities of color that work for you, and you say that diversity and changing the racial structure of the company is important, or the orientation strategy, whatever commitments you're making, then it has to be reflective, right? You can't tell me that Black Lives Matter and then I never see anybody Black in leadership roles, you know? And so what are we going to do today? So businesses, look at your business case, look at your mission, and maybe you have to change some of the mission to make sure that we're making it beneficial, we're making the workplace work for everybody. And again, that's not saying that you have to leave your seat, but how do you pull up another chair, another couple chairs, right? So again, also investing in your managers. I think when I wrote the book and I did my research, over 70% of women of color felt like their managers were not invested in their success. And that's a direct correlation to who gets advanced and promoted if we're not being invested in. And so think about how you can make sure that your managers are equipped to manage diverse talent, right? Think about internally your structures and what you're perpetuating. And those are the things that we can control. You can't control the outside, but internally, what are the systems that you can dismantle and rebuild?
Yeah, I love that, because I think that in times like this, you know, I share the same fear as you, that this will be a passing moment. And I think what ends up, you know, we've seen other moments like this, maybe not to this level of intensity, but just the kind of wave of people focus on these issues. And I think what happens is people look externally and forget that there are things that they can do. And there are a lot of things, particularly businesses, have control over. And I think for companies, and I think similarly for cities, that if you want to attract particularly talent of color, if you want to attract residents of color, you should make sure that the folks that you have like being there, because they're going to be the best ambassadors for you. I'm sure it's true for you, Minda. For places that I used to work, if there's a person of color that's interviewing there, the first thing they do is call me and say, how was your experience there? You know, not necessarily work-wise, but culture-wise. Like, did you feel comfortable there? And so I think that the more businesses realize that, and it's not just your employees, your customers, your suppliers, the people of color that you touch as a business, if they feel you're authentic and you're genuine, they will sing your praises to others. They will help you to recruit other people. I think that that often gets overlooked, and people feel like they have to do these really big grand gestures, which are important, but there are people probably right in your ecosystem that need you to do more for them.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Sheena, because it's not just again, Black lives have to matter for the people that work with you and for you, and for the people that you serve. Recently, I went to go to I don't know what the proper name is, but went to go buy some plants at like a local place. And it was only 3 of us there, a white couple and myself. There were 2 people working. Nobody ever asked if I needed help. Mm-hmm. They walked by me 3 to 4 times, never asked me if I needed anything. And I waited a while to say, okay, let me see what's happening. And even in this climate, this is how I was treated, you know, and I left and was like, you know what, I'm going to choose to spend my money somewhere where I'm seen. Right. And I think that's what I think businesses need to think about. We're in demand right now. We can go wherever we want, and we're going to find those places in which the table wants us to be there and values our voices. And so I think that if companies don't get it right and get it together fairly quickly, you're going to miss out. and on the talent, and other places are going to scoop us up, and we don't, in that place, in this environment, they missed out on the opportunity. I went and spent hundreds of dollars somewhere else on plants. You know what I'm saying? So again, understanding what our worth is and what we're no longer going to tolerate is important too.
Yeah. I've had the opportunity to ask you a lot of questions, so I'll pivot to audience questions for a second, and I'll come back and ask you my last question. So there's a question from Anita who asked, how do you approach situations where people in leadership positions who want to be allies or success partners, but repeatedly miss the main point? For example, don't even recognize that differential treatment is happening. When, if ever, is it time to just give up and walk away?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think at the end of the day, we have to look at our companies like any other relationship that we're in. You know when you're being mistreated. You know when you don't have that conversation that needs to be had. A lot of this stuff is communication, right? Let's have these conversations that need to be had. And if we're not getting the results that we want, we need to strategically find another table to be at or create our own, because we don't have the energy to keep begging folks to see us, promote us, advance us. You know, it's either you're going to or you're not. But I do think we have to give people the space and grace to say, you know, I've actually seen this, face it in fact, and say, but I really love the environment. I mean, I love the company that I work for. I want opportunities. And if they're not providing you those, or they're not managing you accordingly, then you gotta find somewhere else to go. Because I think for many of us, I know for me, I talk about it in the memo, I stayed at one company for 10 years, hoping and praying things would get better. And it just never did. And at some point, I couldn't be mad at the people around me. I had to look myself in the mirror and be like, really, girl, this is what we're going to keep doing? You got to go somewhere else because what happens is it creates so much trauma inside of our bodies. And it makes us start to question who we are, when really the environment should be questioning who they keep promoting into management. And I think that too, companies need to really identify and hold managers accountable, because again, so many people are leaving, not because they don't like where they work, but who they're working for.
I have a question from Alyssa. The way it's written, I'm assuming Alyssa is not a Black woman, because she says, I definitely appreciate that Black women are exhausted and I don't want to add to their burden, but I also want to make sure my Black women colleagues feel seen and heard. Do you have advice on how to navigate that balance?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Show up when it counts, right? One thing you can do right now, you could read books like The Memo. You can go to events that are hosted by Black women. Learn, get your understanding, read the books. There's so many resources out there, because what I find is for me, I'm okay with people asking me certain questions, but again, we're not a monolith, right? And not everybody's going to want to answer the same questions, but you have to come with some level of understanding. Like, I love when a white woman or a white man read the memo and then they reach out to me and say, you know what, now I can have a conversation with my Black colleague because blah, blah, blah. Because we want you to see us not just for the racial stuff, but for the other parts of us as well. If you're only asking me about the Black stuff, how do you think I feel? What if I only asked you about that stuff, right? Like right now I'm reading, not right now, but over the last couple of years, I've been reading a lot of books about those who have experienced discrimination as transgender individuals. Now, right now, I don't necessarily have anyone in my life that has come out to me in that way, but I'm not waiting for that to happen. I'm trying to see, how can I be the best success partner when given the opportunity, or with my resources, with my funds, so that I'm better prepared to be a success partner when I have some fundamental understanding of what some of the experiences are and the discrimination that's going on. Then when I don't have to tap that one trans woman that I know, right? I could say, you know what, I was reading this, and what do you think about this? I can engage everyone as human beings, right? And I think, again, we have to humanize each other. See me beyond, yes, see me as a Black woman, but know that you can also ask me about Game of Thrones too. You could ask me about all these other things. Don't just come to me with that. And I think that's the exhausting part, that you only come to me when it's a racial thing. So being careful with that.
Thank you. So my last question for you, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for bringing your energy, your wisdom and experience. This actually, I think worked out because, you know, you were bringing it to Boston, but now you've brought it to, who knows, you know, I'm sure there are women and men that are on here from all over. So thank you for sharing this space with me. I appreciate it. So one of the things you mentioned in the book is we can't be successful without being on the same team. So what words of wisdom can you leave with us on making room at the table and leveling the playing field in the workplace?
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you, Sheena, for your work. Please support Sheena if you haven't already. Find out how you can, because local is important, how we change the experiences of our people. So thank you for your leadership. You know, again, changing a system requires courage. We all have to lean into our courage and push aside our caution, because nobody benefits when we're cautious. You think about the people that came before us, the leaders that we love and that we use their quotes. We wouldn't be beneficiaries of their change had they not been courageous. So I want all of us to think about, who are we being courageous for? Who are we willing to be courageous for? And those are the people who are going to change the system. And so, you know, I just want you to think about being courageous, because again, nobody benefits when we're cautious. And think about, because I'm probably mostly talking to women, I really want to make an appeal to white women listening today, understanding that yes, as all women, we experience systems of oppression, but some of us are closer to proximity of privilege than others. So how do we close this empathy gap between us? Because there's some friction, whether we want to discuss it or not. There's an empathy gap, I think, that women of color and white women experience at times. And I really hope that we can all see each other and work together and support each other so that we all can secure a seat at the table.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you. Thank you to the Chamber.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Sheena and Minda. I'm just watching all the comments on the webinar, and there are comments of mostly appreciation for bringing this discussion to us. It certainly is a gift, particularly at this time. So many messages. I have literally 4 pages of key learnings from both of you equally, and I'm not going to repeat them, but we are just so much better off just having listened to you this morning. It certainly is a gift. You know, the parts, a few key things that just resonated, and where you stated, you know, it's not enough to know your worth if you don't have the courage to act on it. And those are words that resonate not only personally, but professionally as well. And bringing your authentic self to work, the need to talk about the truth, to be intentional, the power of education. Both of you throughout the discussion talked about that. I saw a lot of people write on the chat, you know, quoting, "When you don't have to suffer in silence, it gives you the courage to be authentic and use your voice." And that is so powerful. You know, the part around evaluating yourself and really and taking the time to educate yourself. How do you dismantle systemic oppression in the workplace? Once we understand the system, we can find solutions and the right tools, which creates a new frame of mind. And how do we prepare for this moment? And then I love the part about sharing and sharing, you know, bringing others with you. Success is not a solo sport. I saw a lot of people write that down as well. And the part when you turned onto the business part about when they say they can't find anybody at the table, you know, and that's clearly they're looking for it in the wrong places, and they need to expand the network. It requires an investment. I love the part, Minda, where you said you can't go back to the same pool and expect a different wave, and the need to be intentional. I also love the part where you say it's not charity. I use that a lot. This isn't about doing the right thing. This is about being smart. And I also love the part about activating your privilege to help others. I saw a lot of women, not of color, asking, how can we help? We understand that you're all exhausted, but please, like, we want to be able to help move this along. And that's exactly it. It's educating yourself and understanding how you can play a role in helping. And a lot of people also wrote down, racism doesn't only kill people, it kills careers. And that certainly is something that many people commented on, the need to be seen so that you can understand and humanize my experience and who I am. And then balancing your voices. And the last part that I wrote down was around how it starts at home. And home can be your actual home, how parents are speaking to their children about race, about opportunities, and also in the workplace. So thank you so much, because I don't think anyone can do justice to everything that was said, but you certainly have touched many, many lives today. And we will certainly share it with who we talk to in our circle. It's so important that we continue to empower each other to speak up, to be heard, amplify our voices, and educate others so that they can also be part of the solution. So to both of you, two extremely powerful women that we have had the privilege of hearing from today, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
and
you.
for your words of wisdom. I wanted to, thank you. Before we close, I just wanted to highlight that some of the following events that will be no match to this one, but still equally as important, to highlight the registration for the Chamber's Fierce Urgency of Now, Millennials of Color Festival, which will open next Wednesday, July 22nd. So please visit cityawake.org/fun for more information. And then also next Thursday, July 23rd at 10 a.m., it's our next Women's Network event featuring Addie Swartz. She's CEO of Reach Higher. And she'll be in a fireside chat with my friend Charlotte Street of Liberty Mutual. And the two of them will discuss ways that companies can support women in the workforce to retain valuable talent, and how women can position themselves to thrive as we all adjust to this new work environment. So once again, thank you to Sheena and Minda for your words of wisdom, for inspiring us, educating us, and really giving us a sense of urgency to do great things and help remove a lot of these obstacles that many of us experience, both professionally and personally. And also to our sponsor, Morgan Lewis, who have made this possible for us, and all of you for joining. If you are new to the network, please join. It is a fabulous group of women leaders across the Commonwealth that are working together to just change the landscape so that we can all keep progressing. So thank you, and have a wonderful day, and stay safe.